off the trail, I found 9 chairs arranged in a perfect circle, all facing inward. The 10th spot was empty. The grass there was flattened and warm, like someone had just stood up. My thermal camera showed no one for a mile in every direction. It also showed 11 heat signatures sitting in those chairs. If I had turned around the moment I saw them, I think I would still be able to sleep. That is the part one keep replaying. Not the circle, not the heat signatures. The decision I made 3 seconds before all of it stopped being a story I could leave behind. I stepped closer. At the time, that still felt like the rational choice. I had gone into the Monreath State Forest because my job had become too digital for me to trust my own eyes anymore. For 7 months I had been working contract search and rescue support for county teams that were too underfunded to buy good equipment and too proud to admit they needed civilians who understood drone mapping. I was not one of the heroes lowering into ravines on ropes. I was the one who stitched thermal sweeps together, marked likely movement corridors, and hiked in when somebody needed a quiet second opinion before they committed more people to the wrong section of woods. Most days the work was boring, in the way good work is boring. A false trail, a lost dog, a hiker who cut west instead of east and spent one wet night pretending he was not frightened. Occasionally something worse, but even the bad days kept the same rules. People left signs, branches snapped, mud shifted, heat faded at a pace you could understand. The woods did not play games. They only looked mysterious to people who did not know how much math and repetition lived inside getting found. That is what I believed before the chairs. I had gone out alone that Saturday, because there had been 3 separate calls over 6 weeks about lights between the old fire roads north of Lake Vesper. Not bright lights. Not camp lanterns, just pale movements reported through trees by hikers who could never agree on distance or shape. The rangers were tired of it. They thought it was prank traffic, teenagers, maybe amateur ghost hunters, with more batteries than sense. They asked if I would do a daylight sweep and mark anything that looked like a regular encampment so they could clear it before summer crowds got heavier. The trail in was easy for the first hour. Then it narrowed into the kind of path that survives more in rumor than in soil. I moved slowly, taking short thermal scans every 10 minutes, more out of habit than expectation. The forest was thick with hemlock and pine, the air damp enough that every fallen trunk smelled alive. Bird noise came and went in clusters. Nothing unusual, nothing cinematic, just miles of trees trying very hard to look identical. Around noon I found the first odd thing. Not the chairs, a patch of white paint on bark. A neat thumb-width stripe, chest high, on the north side of an old maple. Not trail paint, too fresh, too deliberate. I marked it on my map and kept going. 200 yards later I found another stripe, then another. Always on the north side, always about the same height. The spacing between them was irregular enough to avoid looking official, and regular enough that once I noticed the pattern, I could not stop seeing it. I remember telling myself it was somebody's private navigation system. A hunter. A surveyor. One of those urban exploration groups who like to act as if a public forest belongs to the first person who names it strange. I even felt relieved. Weird human behavior was easier than unexplained weather or failing equipment. Human behavior usually came with trash. A bottle cap. A cigarette filter. A footprint where somebody forgot the ground remembers more than they do. But the ground around those trees was clean. No wrappers, no boot cuts, no tire drag. Not even the broken fern stems I would have expected if a group had been moving repeatedly through that section. Only the paint. Only the marks. I should have recognized then that the path they formed was not for walking. It was for aiming. At 12:43, I reached the clearing. My watch logged the time because I had hit the mark button the second I saw open ground where no open ground should have been. The trees broke in a circle maybe 30 feet across, the floor there covered in low grass and needles, instead of brush, as if the place had been maintained by hands too careful to leave shovel cuts. The chairs stood in the center. They were all different. That bothered me more than if they had matched. One was a bentwood dining chair with a split cane seat. One was aluminum folding lawn furniture, striped green and white. One was the kind of padded banquet chair you see stacked in hotel conference rooms. One looked like it had belonged at a school desk sometime in the 70s. 2 were plain kitchen wood. One had rusted metal legs and cracked yellow vinyl. Another was a wicker rocker cut down at the runners so it could stand still. The last was a black plastic patio chair with one arm replaced by a smooth branch lashed tight with electrical tape. 9 chairs, all facing inward, all placed with almost mathematical spacing, and one gap exactly as wide as the others. A 10th place set for a chair that was not there. Nothing in the clearing moved. That was what gave it the feeling of being staged for me. No tarp snapping, no cooler, no ash pit, no evidence that people had laughed or argued or eaten there. Just seats, as if the whole point of the place was not what people did there but where they sat while waiting. I walked the perimeter first. That was instinct. Never walk into the middle of an unknown scene if you do not understand its exits. The grass at the empty spot caught my eye before anything else. It was pressed flat in an oval shape and darker than the rest, as if weight had been there recently. When I crouched and touched it, the blades were still warm. Not sun warm, body warm, the kind of heat you feel in sheets after someone stands up. I looked up fast enough to make myself dizzy. Nothing. No person stepping behind a tree. No sound of somebody running. The clearing stayed empty, with the confidence of something that knew emptiness was not proof. That is when I lifted the thermal monocular. I use a compact unit mounted to a grip, nothing military, just good enough to separate deer from humans and fresh ground from cold rock when conditions cooperate. I swept the tree line first, blue-gray trunks, low static haze where the sun had touched moss, a fox flare moving far to the south, nothing in the clearing but residual warmth at the empty patch. Then I centered the circle. Every chair glowed with a human outline. Not hot enough to be living bodies under fabric, hot enough to be bodies. Heads, shoulders, bent arms, knees. 11 total signatures. 9 occupying chairs. 1 standing at the open place. 1 directly behind me. I spun so hard I nearly dropped the monocular. The view with my eyes was unchanged. No one there. Only the clearing, and the chairs, and the trees. I raised the thermal again. The shapes in the chairs remained. The standing figure at the gap remained. The one behind me was gone. That was the first moment I felt something more humiliating than fear. I felt chosen. I backed out 3 steps and forced myself to breathe the way we are taught on search scenes when adrenaline starts making idiots out of competent adults. Name what you know. Ignore what you cannot verify. I knew my own equipment battery was full. I knew thermal reflections can mislead if a surface holds heat oddly. I knew panic likes to promote possibilities into facts. So I did what a professional does. When reality starts acting theatrical, I started documenting. I took visible light photos from 4 angles. I took thermal stills. I logged coordinates. I recorded a voice note describing chair materials, spacing, direction of shadows, wind speed, cloud cover, everything I could think of that might matter later when this turned out to be explainable, and I was embarrassed by how badly my nerves wanted a monster. While I was recording, I noticed a sound under my own voice, a soft wooden creak, then another, not random, clockwise. As if weight was settling 1 seat at a time around the circle. I stopped talking. The creaking stopped too. The ranger station sat 6 miles south by road and just under 3 by direct line, but radio in that part of Monreath was unreliable, unless you climbed for elevation. Cell service was worse. I tried both anyway. Nothing but static and 1 bar that vanished before the call could fail properly. I should have left then, I know that. I say it every time somebody asks why I went deeper into the clearing instead of back toward the road. But by then I had seen too much to walk away politely. If somebody had staged it, I needed evidence. If somebody was injured nearby, those heat shapes could have been some weird artifact pointing toward camp equipment or recently used insulated material. And if my gear was malfunctioning, I needed to prove that before I trusted it on a real search. So I moved to the empty spot, up close. The flattened grass looked less like someone had stood there, and more like someone had been turning slowly in place. The blade spiraled outward in tiny arcs, heel marks without a shoe print. At the center sat a single object I had missed before, because it matched the color of the duff. A Polaroid photo. Face down. Dry despite the damp ground. I picked it up. The front showed the circle of chairs from above, taken at night. Each chair was occupied by a white blur, shaped like a person overexposed in motion. The empty place faced the camera. Written along the white border in black marker were 5 words. "You were late last time." I said no out loud. Not to anyone. To the sentence. To the cheap certainty of it. To the awful immediate feeling that I had seen those words before. Memory is a treacherous animal when fear feeds it, but this was not vague. When I was 11, my father disappeared for 23 hours in these same woods. That was the family version. The public version was that he got turned around during a November deer walk and spent one freezing night under a fallen pine before stumbling back to the ranger station at dawn. He never liked the story afterward. He would stop people if they tried to make it charming. He said he had not been lost. He said he had been delayed. Nobody knew what he meant. Eventually, he stopped saying even that. 3 weeks after he died, my mother gave me a milk crate of his field journals because she thought I would want the maps. I had skimmed them once, years ago, looking mostly for coordinates and gear lists. Buried in one notebook had been a page torn almost in half, only a few lines still readable. I remembered one of them suddenly, with the clean sickness of a memory that has been waiting for the correct key. "If I'm late again, do not let them keep a chair open." I still had that notebook at home. I had photographed its pages when I was sorting the crate, and standing in that clearing with the Polaroid in my hand, I realized I had been walking toward this place since childhood without knowing the route. The air changed. That sounds dramatic, but there is no better description. The clearing had been cool all afternoon. Now it felt occupied. Not warmer, exactly. Denser. The way a room changes when several people stop talking at once and all decide to watch the same person. The birds had gone silent without my noticing when. The trees around the clearing no longer read as trees so much as an audience standing very far back. I lifted the thermal again. All 9 seated shapes were still there. The standing figure at the empty place was gone. Instead, a 10th seated outline had appeared, and in the gap between 2 chairs opposite me, there was a narrow, cold shape on the ground. Rectangular. The size of a camera case. I crossed to it before I could talk myself out of it. It was an old metal lunchbox, painted red once, now mostly rust and scratches. Inside were 3 things. A box of Strike Anywhere matches, sealed in wax paper. A deer tag from 1998 with my father's name on it. And a cassette tape labeled Second Meeting. No player, just the tape. As if whoever left it believed the label alone was enough. I do not know how long I stood there, holding that lunchbox and trying to build a version of the world where there was still a prank explanation large enough to contain my father's tag. Not because I thought he was alive. Because dead men are not supposed to continue scheduling you. A branch snapped beyond the tree line, then another, on the opposite side, then a third, behind me. Measured spacing. A ring tightening. I backed toward the south edge of the clearing, the best route to the fire road, and every chair creaked once at the same time. All 9. No, 10. Because by then there were 10 chairs. I do not know when the last one appeared. I never saw it arrive. But it was there now, in the open place. Plain oak, ladder back, damp at the legs as if lifted from a cellar and planted in the earth for me. On its seat sat another Polaroid. This one was still developing, gray shapes bleeding into focus. The clearing, the circle, and me, standing in it, holding the lunchbox. Taken from behind my left shoulder. From a height no person in the clearing had occupied. That finally broke whatever professional distance I had left. I ran south without checking the map, following slope and instinct. Smashing through brush because the path in no longer mattered more than speed out. For the first 100 yards, I heard nothing except my own breath and gear knocking my ribs. Then I heard chairs scraping across dirt behind me, not fast, not chasing in a sprint, keeping pace. The patient sound of furniture being pulled into position 1 seat at a time. I do not remember falling, but I must have. Mud coated my left sleeve afterward, and one palm stayed embedded with gravel for days. I remember getting the radio to crackle on a ridge and shouting coordinates so badly the dispatcher made me repeat them twice. I remember telling the ranger on duty not to let anyone come alone. I remember saying, over and over, "There are 10 now. 10 chairs. 10. as if the number itself were the emergency. They found me half a mile from the access road. 2 rangers and a volunteer medic. I took them back after dusk, with flood lamps, radios, and enough embarrassment to make me angry. The paint marks were still on the trees. The clearing was still there. The chairs were gone. No impressions. No drag lines. No lunchbox. No Polaroids. No tape. Nothing in the grass except 10 pale rings where chair legs had pressed into the soil long enough to kill it. And at the exact center of the circle, 1 fresh footprint. Mine. The others thought I was concussed, or heat-struck, or telling the truth badly because fear had scrambled sequence and scale. I let them think some version of that. It was easier than trying to explain the thing that happened next. Because when I got home that night, I went straight to the milk crate and found my father's field notebook. The torn page was still there. I had remembered the line correctly. But there was more beneath it than I recalled. A sentence cut off at the edge where the page had been ripped. If I am late again, do not let them keep a chair open. It learns my family by watching who returns. If Owen ever comes here, tell him not to stand where the 10th chair should be. Owen is my name. I did not sleep. Around 3:11 in the morning, while every light in my apartment was on, I heard wood creak in the hallway outside my bedroom. Not house settling. Not pipes, a careful loaded chair sound, as if somebody had lowered themselves into a seat and leaned back to wait. I told myself I would not look. I told myself that until dawn. Then another sound came. A small, polite tap against my bedroom door. 3 knocks. The same rhythm my father used when he did not want to wake the whole house. I opened the thermal monocular before I opened the door. The display warmed to life in my shaking hand. Through the wood, directly on the other side, sat a single bright outline in perfect profile, head bent slightly, hands folded, patient, like someone who had arrived early for a meeting. At the floor beside it, glowing fainter, were 9 chair legs spread in a circle around my bed.
Thank you for watching. If this story pulled you in, do me one favor. Hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so the next one finds you the moment it drops. Remember, nothing is ever just what it seems. See you on the next one.